Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for the beginning of chapter 27, World War One. And as we go along, we are going to talk a little bit about um, how the war began and eventually kind of how it escalated, and some factors involving other revolutions and how the United States was brought into the war and kind of the aftermath of the war itself. So we're going to start with the war and how it began and such. But you kind of have to know a little bit leading up to this. And kind of understanding the state of Europe right after the Napoleonic Wars. We had a situation where at the Congress of Vienna, we started drawing up these alliances and kind of breaking down Europe into political boundaries and such. So you had some of these kind of things that were kind of in the works for some time. So Europe was on the brink of war in 1914, and it was due to four things: the concept of militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And what I want to do is kind of explain what each one of these are, but looking at militarism maybe from this map, each of the major powers had been in the process of building up its military. And if you can look at the map in front of you, Germany certainly had taken upon themselves to really beef up their military. But not only them, the French, and rightly so, because France and Germany had been fighting one another for a course of almost a century, and then our Russians. And if you compare that to maybe Austria, Hungary, or Great Britain, maybe not so much. So, militarism is this idea of building up a military, in other words, kind of a massive arms race, using the new technology that kind of came out of the Industrial Revolution to make weapons bigger, better, and far more lethal. You had alliances, which basically is this idea of partnering up or aligning yourself with another nation because you have some kind of mutual understanding or you have a shared resource or such. Uh, in a way, now Europe is going to be kind of in this breaking up of teams. Imperialism, which is kind of a theme that we've talked about for a while in world history, but this idea of building empires, trying to have more land, more territory than your neighbors. And then finally, nationalism, that pride that you have in your people or your country. All four of these make up what we call the main causes, MAIN, if you think about that acronym. Uh, and hence, that's one of the things that you need to kind of recall here. This is something that you might want to pay attention to because it'll probably show up on a test. When we talk about alliances leading into World War One, Europe really had two major alliances. These alliances, for the most part, are going to stay relatively the same, with an exception of a few players kind of moving back and forth. Originally, you had the Triple Alliance, which was made up of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Italy, at some point in time when the war breaks out, basically drops out of the Triple Alliance and aligns itself really with what we would call the Allies. The other group is what we call the Triple Entente. This was made up of Great Britain, France, and Russia. And at some point in time, Italy is going to join them, and the United States is going to join, and we're going to change the name of the Triple Entente. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. The purpose of forming these groups of allies was to ensure that if one nation was attacked, its allies would join to defend them, resulting in a larger war. And some of this started really in the era right after the Napoleonic Wars. The Crimean War, which happened in the 1850s, was really one of the first wars that we're going to see the power of an alliance as far as how we're going to line our players up. But by the time we get to the beginning of the 20th century, yeah, this is about the only way anybody wants to go to war. When you look at the map below, those nations that are eventually going to be referred to as the allies are kind of in the gold, whereas those people who are going to be a part of what they call the central powers which are basically Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, are going to be kind of the enemies. Note that Spain, a good portion of Scandinavia, being Norway, Sweden, uh, for the most part, neutral. They did not take a side, along with Sweden as well. Um, Along with this, there was also the Schaeffelin Plan, which was something that was born out of the ideas of a few German military strategists. Was the idea that if Germany and France ever got themselves into a situation where they would go to war again on a massive level, then rather than crossing from Germany into France, Germany opted for the idea of going through a neutral nation like Belgium. And they're going to do this not only in World War One, but again in World War Two. This is a plan that seemed to work very well for them, and unfortunately, the French didn't quite figure that out until it was a little too late. The big event that really props up this whole World War is one event, and that is the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, or Francis Ferdinand, and his wife Sophia, who were basically the heirs to the monarchy in Austria-Hungary. And they had actually visited the city of Sarajevo, which was a part of Serbia at this period of time. Eventually, it will become part of what is known as Yugoslavia and such. But they had gone there to greet the people, had been in a parade, and a man named Gabriello Princip, who was a member of a terrorist group known as the Black Hand, stepped out of the crowd and assassinated both Sophia and Franz Ferdinand. So the war broke out when Austria-Hungary blamed the Serbs for the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, leading to war between both countries' allies. What would happen is on June 28th, 1914, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by our friend Gabriello Princip. Um, as a way to kind of, get revenge, Austria-Hungary wanted to get, kind of, I guess you could say, revenge for this, and so they basically gave an ultimatum to Serbia. Well, Serbia had been allied with Russia, and so in a way they were picking on Russia, and they had 30 days to kind of figure this all out. Well, in the end of 30 days, on July 28th, 1914, nothing had happened, and thus Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And with that, Russia, supporting Serbia, backed them up. They declared war on basically Austria-Hungary, and the next thing you know, Germany's pulled in. They start declaring war on Russia and Serbia. Well, then Great Britain and France jump in and they declare war on Germany. And the next thing you know, all the dominoes have fallen and we've got a world war. Just to note, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who you see pictured there, he was the emperor or the Kaiser of Germany at this period of time. This is a guy who was the man that probably, I would say, probably pumped up this war a little bit more than anybody else. He had a huge military, had a lot of men in his military, and once he gets involved, this becomes a really big event. So, our big powers, as far as the alliances, and this is something you do need to write down. You have the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. You have the allies being Great Britain, and that would include Australia, probably New Zealand, Canada, France, Russia, and eventually it would include the United States and Italy. All right, thank you very much.